Thank you for an extremely handsome, generous introduction, during which I began to feel like, as I surveyed the audience also, and having been listening to your music, a bit like a Daniel being introduced to a den of, I'm sure, very charming lion cubs. A different experience from my common one. Let's get straight to it because time presses. There are, I suppose, three forms of the divine, and if you eliminate polytheism, which I think we may as well all do for today's purposes, there are two ways of approaching it. One is the deistic, and one is the theistic. I hope I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but if you don't know it, it's useful, and it's a very important opening distinction. There are those, there have been those, among them were many of the founders of our great republic, in particular Mr. Thomas Jefferson, who were not Christians, but who were deists. They believed that the evidence of the universe and of nature showed a designer, seemed to imply it by its patterns and repetitions. A very, very common usage in those days was that of the watch, which later turns up in Mr. Paley's Natural Theology, which for many, many years was the central Christian text in the argument for design. He says very simply, if you're an Aborigine and you're walking along a beach and you find a pocket watch ticking away, you don't know what it's for. You have no education that would enable you to judge its purpose, but you can tell it's not a rock, and you can tell it's not a vegetable, and you can tell it's been made by someone for some purpose. That much you must know, even if you know nothing else. The metaphor of the watch was very much used by the deists. And of course, watches run down and break down. And it was believed by many of them that if an intelligence had begun the universe, begun the process, he took no further interest in it. Didn't intervene in human affairs, didn't mind who won the war, didn't mind which country was the leading one, watched with relative, well, or didn't watch with indifference, plague, famine, war, and so forth. That's a very hard position to oppose, by the way. It's very difficult, impossible, actually, to disprove. One can only say the evidence for it isn't quite strong enough to be persuasive. To be a theist, in other words, to occupy the position that many people here currently do, and my opponent does, to be a member of a monotheistic religion that believes that truth has been revealed, that God has intervened in human affairs, that he has a plan for us, each of us individually as well as a species, and that it shows, is a very, very much more difficult undertaking. I'm going to show why I think it's more or less impossible. There are usually three ways in which people try and demonstrate it. One is looking at the cosmos, the vault of heaven, the world beyond what we can quite see or apprehend. The second is human history and its development, and the third is ourselves, our own bodies, our makeup. Again, I'll have to condense, I hope you'll forgive me, but I'll sketch in what I think the objections are. Unless you don't believe, I don't know what they've been teaching you, unless you do not believe in the theory of what is conventionally called now the Big Bang, that our universe is billions of years old and began with a gigantic explosion, which is still going on, you are forced to be very, very, very modest about what it is you can know about anything. What preoccupies most scientists now is not how much they know compared to 50 years ago, though that is enormous as a difference, but how little they know compared to what they're finding out. So all these conclusions are very tentative, but minimally they must involve this. For a few milliseconds, really, of cosmic time, our species has lived on one very, very small rock in a very small solar system that's a part of a fantastically unimportant suburb in one of an uncountable number of galaxies. And that every second since the Big Bang, every single second, a star the size of our sun has blown up, gone to nothing, swelled up, shrunk into what's called a dwarf and disappeared. And that the matter of which we are made Cheer up, by the way. You are all made of stardust, which is a good way of thinking about yourself. But that's the price of that stardust. And every second I've been speaking, another of those suns has gone out. And indeed, physicists now exist who can tell you the date, more or less the exact one, on which our sun will follow suit. So the old Christian revivalists who used to stand on the street corner with signs saying, "Repent, the end of the world is at hand," were in their way right. We know when it's coming to an end, and we know how it will be. But and we know something even more extraordinary, which is that the rate of expansion of this explosion we're living through is actually speeding up. Our universe is flying apart further and faster than we thought it was. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it, and everyone who studies it professionally finds it impossible to reconcile this extraordinarily destructive, chaotic, self-destructive process, to find in it the finger of God, to find in that the idea of a design. And that's not just because we know so little about it. It's because what we know about it that's essential doesn't seem as if it's the intended result brought about by a divine, benign creator who loves every single one of us, living as we do on this tiny rock in this negligible suburb of the cosmos. So again, good luck if you want to, but if you're looking for God in the first instance, those are the difficulties you'll have to begin to encounter. If you want to take human history as a vindication, again, I'd urge great caution on you. And I'll take a non-Christian example, if I may, though I think in all cases it's a big mistake to think that your own cause or your own country or your own side has God in its corner. For one thing, it commits the sin of pride, which I know you've been warned against, what the Greeks call hubris. It is probably better, as Abraham Lincoln said, at a time when two sets of Christians were fighting over whether slavery was Christian or not, to decide the future of this union. Abraham Lincoln, who was also likewise not a Christian but a deist, if he was anything, said it might be more useful to find out if we are on God's side than whether he's on ours. But the temptation to enlist the cause of a good God is very strong. Indeed, there are many people in the world today, they're well known as jihadists, Muslim fundamentalists, people who want to kill, really do seriously want and intend to kill everyone in this room, who get the energy they've got and are willing to give their lives because they are so sure that God is with them. And if you want to believe that God intervenes on one side or another and that God takes a hand in human history and human affairs, you have to grant it to them too. I don't know whether you're ready to do that. Or you'd have to say, no, it's only true when we say so, which I think would be, wouldn't it, a rather unsatisfying argument. I'll take neither the Christians nor the Jews but the Muslims. Excuse me, neither the Christians nor the Muslims but the Jews, who say they have a covenant with God, whose testament we Christians, we Western civilization, Christians include in the Holy Book. Those who claim to have met God, or whose leader met God face to face in the Sinai Peninsula, to have received the law, to have had a direct revelation of morality from him, to have a special covenant. Now, let me just say briefly what the problem with that has been for the Jewish religious leadership. About 10 years before I was born, about 50 to 60% of the Jewish people of Europe were put to death in disgusting ways by mass murder, gassing, immolation. In Christian Europe in the middle of the 20th century. And many people wondered how God could permit this to a people who he had made a special relationship with. And many people left the synagogue as a result. They stopped going. The Jewish people are in their majority now post-religious, secular, very largely for this reason. And some rabbis were bold enough to say, no, there is a reason for this. You fell away from God and you forgot Israel, you forgot Jerusalem. It's a punishment for exile, it's a punishment for inattention to the covenant. Many people who'd seen their children burned alive said, I'm not listening to this, I'm leaving the religion. And many rabbis went quiet, thinking perhaps they shouldn't come up with any too instant explanation for such a fantastic human disaster and human crime. And they waited, and then the Israelis won a war in 1967 which got them back control of the holy places in Jerusalem. And then the rabbis blew the ram's horn again and said, no, no, we should have waited. Now we see the finger of God. It was all to drive us back to Palestine, where we should always have been, and to make us the owners of Jerusalem. Now we see what the design was. Well, I dare say you read the papers and watch the news. There isn't a single Israeli now who isn't wondering whether the victory in that war and the conquest of those holy places wasn't a disaster, hasn't led them into a terrible trap of endless war and confrontation in the Middle East, where their own hubris, their own occupation of other people's territory and holy places has led to a terrible impasse. There. Food, I hope, at any rate for thought. Probably the most I can do today is sow a little doubt and suggest a bit of reading. Then, our bodies. Well, again, I don't know what they've been telling you about Mr. Darwin and about where we come from and our kinship with other animal species, but I consider it a fairly settled question that our resemblance to other primates isn't exactly accidental. It's now possible to measure, in fact, in chromosomes. We are perhaps half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee, our nearest relative. All of you, when you were being born, when you were within your mother's womb, grew a coat of hair about 4 months in, and then shed it again. You don't need it anymore. All of you have an appendix that isn't needed any longer for the kind of digestion that you do. All of you have the same teeth. That's why you have to work on your wisdom teeth so much, and other things for the kind of diet other primates used to have to live on. All of you bear what Charles Darwin himself at the end of Origin of Species calls the unmistakable stamp of our lowly origin. You're a mammal, a primate. Take heart, primates can do, capable of very great things, but we are adapted to an environment, the African savanna, which we abandoned. Why did we abandon it? Because if we didn't abandon it, we were going to go extinct. There was such a climate crisis in Africa all those thousands of years ago that the tiny tribe that was then us made the very smart decision to move north and out and away. It's reckoned by the National Geographic, I recommend you look this up, that the human species was down to less than 2,000 or 3,000 people at that point. And if it had not made this move, would have gone the way of, mark this figure, would have gone the way of 99.8%. 99.8% of all other species that have ever existed on this planet and gone extinct. Now, I just rub that in once more. 99.8% of all the forms of life ever to appear on this terrestrial globe are gone, wiped out. And it was nearly us. And this doesn't, to me, give the evidence of a design, of the finger of a god of any kind, let alone one who wishes us well. It rather suggests to me that nature and the world and human life are a struggle. You'll tell me when I've got, won't you, sir? A minute or two. Give me a wave. Thank you. I felt I was getting close to trespassing on Dr. Dembski's time. Now, incidentally, it's really worth your time to write off to the National Geographic. They'll send you back a kit. You scrub the inside of your cheeks, put it in a solution, send it back. They will show you a map of where your ancestors came from in Africa and at what time and what route they took to get to where you are now. It will be very eye-opening. I strongly suggest you do it. While I have your attention, I also suggest on the matter of evolution that you read a book by Dr. Francis Collins called The Language of God. Dr. Collins, as you may know, ran the Human Genome Project, which analyzed our kinship with other animals, and we now know the whole extent of our genetic code and ID, including the messy gaps in it that are Dr. Dembski's speciality, and brought this in ahead of time and under budget, and is the greatest student of DNA and stem cells and all that go with it who we have amongst us. I would say the greatest American living physician. I am prejudiced. He's a great friend of mine. He's also been a great help to me in my current illness. He's a great American. He's also a great Christian. That's why I recommend him to you. A very strong and believing Christian. And the chapters in his book, The Language of God, that tell you, don't waste your time not believing in evolution. Don't let anyone tell you it didn't take place. Nice, simple, clear, brilliant chapter. is a chapter you are not educated if you have not read. I'll close and say, because I've got only a minute, why wouldn't I believe in this? Why might one not want to believe in it, even if it could be true? Because my view is that it's not only not true, but it's probably a good thing it isn't. Why is it not a good thing? Because I don't think it's healthy for people to want there to be a permanent, unalterable, irremovable authority over them. I don't like the idea of a father who never goes away. And nor do you, if you think about it. When you get closer to parenthood, you won't say to your children, don't worry, I'll never die. You won't be at my funeral, I'll be at yours. I'll be at your grandchildren's funeral. You'll never hear the end of me. That's actually not loving paternity. The idea of a king who cannot be deposed, very un-American idea as well as a very undemocratic one. The idea of a judge who doesn't allow a lawyer or a jury or an appeal. This is an appeal to absolutism. It's the part of ourselves that's not so nice, that wants security, that wants certainty, that wants to be taken care of. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the human struggle for freedom was against the worst kind of dictatorship of all, the theocracy, the one that claims it has God on its side, the divine right of kings, the feudal system, the monarchical one against which the American Revolution, with its secular humanism, took place. I believe the totalitarian temptation has to be resisted, and I believe this is one of its core and origin points. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to consider emancipating yourself from the idea that you, selfishly, are the sole object of all the wonders of the cosmos and of nature, because that's not a humble idea at all. It's a very arrogant one, and there's no evidence for it. You do better to emancipate yourself from it and do some real study of genetics and biology and cosmology. And then, again, a second emancipation, to think of yourselves as free citizens who are not in thrall to any supernatural, eternal authority, which you will always find is interpreted for you by other mammals who claim to have access to this authority that gives them special power over you. Don't allow yourselves to have your lives run like that. I've exhausted my time. I'm really grateful for your attention. I can't wait to be back. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchens.